Hello, everybody. Welcome to my Wiley solution walkthrough. This is for accounting tools for business decision making. Let me just turn on my video. Hello, wherever you are out there. For business decision making, this is the 8th edition of that textbook. This is problem 16A-7. I was originally looking at the problem 16, but I prefer doing it this way in terms of teaching you equivalent units and process costing. So the textbook authors are Paul Kimmel, Jerry Weingant, and Jill Mitchell. The question used in the presentation is copyright 2022 by John Wiley and Sons. All rights are reserved. This is for educational purposes only. The video may not be distributed or redistributed without the express permission of Wiley. The solution presentation is copyright 2022 by Bennett Tchaikovsky. All rights are reserved. The opinions contained within this presentation are mine, or Bennett Tchaikovsky, and not the authors of the textbook or of Wiley. Okay. Before we say thank you to Wiley, we always want to thank the bus driver, right? That's what my kids used to do when they played that game that they no longer play. Right over here. So we've got problem 16A-7. So this is a company that is going through and using a FIFO, for process costing in terms of equivalent units and costs. So the way we want to set up these questions is we're going to have over here, we're going to have our WIP direct materials, and we're going to have WIP conversion or work in process conversion. And we've got two different sets of things. So we're going to first take a look at our bicycles. Okay, so our bicycles in terms of the work in process, the work in process as of March 1st. And it doesn't really matter where we put this work in process because you'll see momentarily what's going to happen to it. So we're just going to throw it in direct materials. So this was at 19,280, right? So this is my beginning inventory. My direct materials are going to be 50,000. And then over here, we've got our direct labor and manufacturing overhead. So over here, we've got 25,900 and 30,000. So this is for bicycles. And this is also over here going to be for bicycles. Okay, and this is going to be our finished goods inventory for bicycles. Okay. So the first, when we're dealing with FIFO in terms of equivalent units, what we want to kind of remember is, what does FIFO stand for? FIFO means is going to be first in, first out. So what I want you to do whenever you have an equivalent units question, or when you have a process costing question that's using FIFO, the first thing I want you to do, and this is why this number doesn't really matter, is I want you to take that beginning inventory and we're going to send it immediately to our finished goods. So this is going to come right over here. So 19,280 to finished goods inventory. And then this is basically our beginning inventory. So the thought is with FIFO is that when we're dealing with equivalent units, as well as also dealing with the costs, is that those beginning inventory costs are going to be immediately moved to finished goods. Now, the next part of this is in terms of computing equivalent units. So in order to do this question, we have to read the question a little bit more carefully. Okay, so right over here, Owen Company manufactures bicycles and tricycles. And for both products, materials are added at the beginning of the production process. So that's a really important thing, especially for this, because when we're dealing with equivalent units, we're going to need to compute it for two different parts. We're going to need to compute it for materials, and then we're going to need to compute it for conversion. So for materials, right, basically for this beginning inventory or the work in process. So the work in process units are 200. The units started are 1,000. And then over here, we have WIP as of ending. right? And why are we going through and using equivalent units, right? So remember that equivalent units is essentially, I'm trying to figure out how to transfer these costs out of work in process direct materials into finished goods inventory. And when I'm looking at this, 1,000 units or 200 units that are 80% complete are not going to be the same as 300 units that are at 40% complete. So I have to basically figure out a way to go through and to basically make these numbers comparable. So when it comes to equivalent units for FIFO for materials, so our beginning WIP, okay, now this is what's really important. When we're dealing with FIFO, we're focused on, well, what did we have to do during the current period to make it 100% complete? And this is with respect to beginning inventory only. So over here, our beginning work in process in terms of units, this is basically, we're going to have over here, we're going to have 200. And this is going to be at 0%. And why is it at 0? Because this beginning work in process units was the ending from the prior period. And we're being told that in terms of materials that they're added at the beginning of the process. So these were already 100% complete. So basically our equivalent units is going to be 0. Okay, so now when we're looking at started, okay, this is also something that kind of throws me off because usually the way I'm used to seeing these types of questions is I look at basically started and completed. The question I have for you, if we started with 1,000 and we ended up with 300, how many did we go through and complete during the period? So our started and completed is going to be how much? Well, this is going to be 700. Where is the 700 coming from? Well, right up here, we're going to have 1,000 units started. And then we're going to have over here minus 300 ending. So basically 700 started and completed. Okay, and generally for this one over here, this is going to be 100% done during the current period. So our equivalent units for this are going to be 700. So again, we want to try to basically say started and completed. How many did we start and complete? Well, we started with 1,000. We ended up over here having 300 left. So how many did we start and complete? It's going to be 700. Now for our ending WIP, we had over here 300 units. But in terms of how much are these complete with respect to materials, well, even though this says it's only 40% complete, we know a little bit better. And we know that, well, wait a second, if we're adding our materials at the very beginning of the production process, these must also be 100% complete with respect to materials. So this is a little bit of a trickier question. So our total materials equivalent units is going to be 1,000. Okay, so again, this is a little bit trickier, but it's kind of fun to go through and do new problems. Okay, so let's now take a look at equivalent units FIFO for conversion. And this hopefully will not be as tricky. What does conversion refer to? It refers to the direct labor and then the factory overhead. So over here, okay, an EU, what does that stand for? It does not stand for European Union. This is equivalent units. Okay. So over here, we had 200 in our beginning work in process. These were 80% complete. Okay. So these were 80% complete. So the question I need to ask myself is, what do I need to do to make them 100% complete? Right? This is not really applicable to materials because those were already 100% complete, but this is telling us over here that these were 80% complete. Because I already shipped off these beginning inventory costs, I want to focus on the current period. So over here, this is showing at 80%. So essentially what I'm going to need to do in terms of my percentage, this is going to be 0.2, right? Where is the 0.2 coming from? It's essentially right over here. This is going to be our, basically beginning inventory, 100% complete. minus 80% already completed. So this is going to be 20% in the current period. Okay, so right over here for our equivalent units for conversion are going to be 40. Now, again, right over here, started and completed, this is going to be the same. As we look at this over here, started in production were 1,000, we had 300 ending. So our started and completed are going to be 700, and this is going to be at 100%. Okay, now in our ending WIP, we've got 300. Now this is a little bit different. Over here, this ending work in process is at 40% completion. So I'm just going to go ahead and use 40%. Why didn't I use 100%? Because materials are kind of funky. They're adding in those all at the very beginning. So it's going to be at 100%. But this one over here is we're going to be using it at 40% because that's how much we did during the period. So now that we look at all of this over here, we now have my total conversion equivalent units is going to be at 860. So that's the first part. So again, why do we use equivalent units? Because we're trying to transfer costs out of conversion, out of direct materials into finished goods inventory. And we do this through the process of equivalent units. Note, if you've been watching some of the other videos from before, when it comes to weighted average process costing, that we would just assume that 100% is done in the beginning inventory, that it's all kept in there. But the biggest difference between weighted average and FIFO is how we treat the beginning inventory. The equivalent units here would not change. It's just the beginning. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come up with our cost per equivalent unit. So our cost per equivalent unit for direct materials is going to be what? Well, if I look at what is in my direct materials, well, after I sent out those other costs, right, what do I have left? Well, over here, I basically have left in terms of my, what I have remaining is I have 50,000. Okay, so my cost per equivalent unit over here for direct materials is going to be, I'm going to have 50,000. I'm going to divide this by, right over here, my total equivalent units for direct materials, and this is going to be 1,000. So my cost per equivalent unit for materials is going to be at 50, okay? So now what do I do? Well, what I need to kind of figure out over here is I have two different ways I can play it. How many did I actually send off? Well, I sent off 700 units. So over here, I need to send over here 700 units at a total cost of 50 or 35,000. This is going to go over here to finished goods. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more room. Okay, to FGI from direct materials. And we've got this coming right over here. So this is coming over here. Now, what do we have left? Well, over here, we've got 15,000 left. Is there a way we can check our work? And the answer is yes. That 15,000 has to equal to the WIP ending in terms of our equivalent units, or this is going to be 300 equivalent units times $50, which is our cost per equivalent unit, or 15,000. Right, remember, you always have a way of going through and checking your work as you go through and do these problems, and that's a great step to go through and do. So now let's go ahead and take a look at our conversion costs. So let's come over here, and we're going to kind of go through and do the same thing. I'm just going to put this aside just over here for a moment. Let's go ahead and do this one. So our cost per equivalent unit conversion is going to be, well, so this is our total direct materials costs. This is our cost per equivalent unit direct materials. So over here, our cost per equivalent unit for conversion. So what we want to go ahead and do over here is we're going to take our total conversion costs, right? Our total conversion costs are what we just incurred during the time period. We do not worry about that beginning inventory. Why? We already shipped it out. So over here, We've got 25,900 plus the 30,000. I'm going to go ahead and divide this by my total equivalent units. My total equivalent units for conversion were 860. When I go through and divide this through, I come up with a cost per equivalent unit of 65 for conversion. So as I look at this over here, right, what I'm now going to go ahead and do is say, all right, let's do it kind of the other way this time. Well, how many units did we have in our ending inventory? Well, we had 120 in our 120 equivalent units in our ending inventory. So this balance right over here, right, this ending balance over here in work in process conversion has to be 65, which is the cost per equivalent unit, times 120 or 7,800. So coming over here, what does that mean? It means that I basically shipped out 48,100. So over here, I've got 48,100. That's what's coming out over here. Now, where did this number come from? Well, in terms of looking at my equivalent units, I had 40 from the beginning, and then I had 700 that were started and completed. So this is going to be 740 equivalent units, right? The 40 from the beginning plus the 700 started and completed. I'm going to multiply that by 65. If I take 740 and multiply that by 65, I should get 48,100, which I do. Okay, so over here, my ending finished goods inventory is going to be 102,380 for the bicycles. And if we come over here and we look at, let's see. So over here, transferred out for the bicycles, they're kind of giving us some numbers to check. Transferred out is 102,380. That's exactly what went over here to finished goods. The cost, the materials, 1,000, and I think that's referring over here to this equivalent units. And then for basically the $50 per equivalent unit. And that's how we came up with this value over here of the $50. And then over here, coming down over here, is that what's remaining in the WIP? Well, what's remaining in the WIP is going to be this. It's going to be 15,000 from the work in process materials plus the 7,800 from the work in process conversion, or 22,800. So it's through and doing this for the bicycles. Now let's go ahead and take a look, and let's go ahead and do this for the tricycles. Okay, so let's go ahead and now take a look at our tricycles. Okay, so work in process beginning units over here were 100. Units started into production were 1,000, and then work in process units as of March 31st were 60. Our work in process, and we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing, 6125. Direct materials are going to be 30,000. Direct labor and manufacturing overhead over here, this is going to be 14,300 and then 20,000. Now, as we're kind of going through and learning this, our beginning balance right over here, and this is for the tricycles. So our tricycles right over here, what's the first thing we're going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to go through and do is we're doing FIFO, right? First in, first out. So this is immediately going to go over here to our finished goods inventory. The second thing we're going to go through and do is we put in our beginning costs, right? So we put in the 14,300 and we put in the 20,000 and we put in this 30,000. Now what's left over here, of course, is going to be just the amount of the direct materials, because we shoved out the beginning inventory costs immediately to finished goods, right? So that was our goal over here in terms of getting that done. Okay. Now let's go through and take a look at equivalent units. Remember, for the materials, this is a little bit funky. Why is it funky? It is because the materials are added all at the very beginning. So over here, If we look at this, this is 200 at 0. Remember, in FIFO and beginning inventory, we're focused on what do we need to do to make it 100% complete. Because the ending inventory was already 100% complete because all the materials were added at the beginning, this is going to be 0. So over here, so our equivalent units for the beginning materials is going to be 0. Now, when I look at over here in this part over here, in terms of how many did we go through in start and complete? Well, as I look at this, we started in a production of 1,000, but we ended up with having 60. So that means I must have completed 940. So 1,000 started minus 60 ending equals 940 started and completed. Okay, so that's where that number is coming from. Okay, so right over here, give this a new color. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this real quick and I'll come back in just a moment. Okay, so going back over here to when we're looking over here at FIFO, basically over here we've got 200. We've got 940 in terms of the started and completed. That's coming from 1,000 less the 60 that's in our ending. And then over here, we know that this is also going to be at 100%, right? So this over here is going to be at 100% because all of those materials are being added at the beginning of production. And then lastly, we have our ending, and our ending, we also know that for materials, this is also going to be at 100%. So again, the concept in terms of for this particular question, remember the wording is really important where the materials are all added at the very beginning. So over here, our total equivalent units for materials are going to be 1,000. Now, of course, over here for FIFO, it's going to be a little bit different. So over here, in terms of our beginning work in process in terms of units, right over here, and this actually, I made a little bit of a mistake. This should be 100. So here we go over here. So this says over here that it was 75% complete for these beginning inventory units. And this is really going to be as respect to conversion. So the question I always want to ask myself is, what do I need to do to make these units 100% complete? So if they are already 75% complete, I'm going to need to put in another 25% in the current period. So in terms of my equivalent units for conversion, for the tricycles, this is going to be at 25. My units started, the computation is going to be exactly the same, which meaning that I've got 1,000 started. Basically 60 was in my ending. So I've got 940, and this is also going to be at 100%. So this is going to be 940. And then my ending work in process, this over here is at 40%. Remember, it's a different deal. Excuse me. This is 60 at 25%. So this over here is going to be at 15. So my equivalent units for conversion are going to be 980. So now that we have our equivalent units for both materials and for conversion, it's time to use this to come up with our cost per equivalent unit. So for our cost per equivalent unit, if we're looking over here at my cost per equivalent unit for direct materials, what I need to do is I need to know two things. My equivalent units for direct materials are 1,000. My total direct material costs for the tricycles was over here at 30,000. So my equivalent cost per unit for the direct materials is for the tricycles is going to be 30. Over here for my conversion costs, right? My total conversion costs were my direct labor plus my manufacturing overhead of 14,300, and then we have 20,000. So over here, my total conversion costs, my total equivalent units for conversion is going to be at 980. When I divide this through, I'm going to get $35 per unit. Now that we know what our cost per equivalent unit is, we can start moving product out. Now, as we kind of saw from the last example, I can take two approaches. Right over here for the direct materials, I can say, well, I've got 60 units of equivalent units of direct materials in my ending work in process. So what I can do here is I can take 60 equivalent units and I can multiply that by my cost per equivalent unit. My cost per equivalent unit is for the direct materials is at 30. So if I take this $60 plus $30 or times $30 cost per equivalent unit materials, this is going to give me 60 times 30 or 1,800. What does that mean? It means I must have transferred out the difference over here, 28,200. So this is going to come in over here. Basically, this is coming in from direct materials. This over here was the beginning. Remember, we're doing FIFO. The beginning always goes out immediately. How do I know if this is correct? Well, if I take 940, which are my equivalent units that I started and completed, and I take 940 and I multiply that by 30, I'm going to get 28,200. So again, that's a way I can go through and check my work. For this part over here, my total work in process conversion costs are 34,300. If I come over here and I look at, well, how much did I send to finished goods? Well, I sent 965. So this is 940 plus the 25 from the beginning. So I'm going to take 965. I'm going to multiply that by my cost per equivalent unit for conversion. Again, this is what I transferred out, 25, 940, and I basically have 35 left. So over here, this is going to be for my conversion. And when I look at what I have over here in terms of my ending, right, my ending over here is 525. How do I know that that's correct? Well, if I take 15, which are my equivalent units for my ending inventory for conversion, and I multiply that by 35, what I'm going to end up with is 15 times 35 or 525. So whatever way you go through and do it, just make sure you're going through and you're checking your work. So over here, in terms of my finished goods inventory for the tricycles, we get a total of 68,100. Let's go ahead and take a look over here in terms of what it's going through and asking us to do. It's asking us to prepare for the bicycles only, but we decided to go crazy and basically do both. But let's go ahead and take a look at our solutions and see if we're close on these other parts. So here we go. So we're now taking a look over here at the tricycles. So we basically came up with these values over here for the direct materials equivalent units, basically because they were all being added at the very beginning of the period. This is going to be 1,000, which is what we had. We had over here like at 980, and here are our costs per equivalent units. And then as we kind of come over here in terms of looking at like what's remaining, it's going to be the 1,800 plus the 525. And this was the total amount that we went through and we sent over to it. So again, you know, I love using T accounts, especially for this, just mainly because visually, I think it just reminds us to go through and to take that beginning inventory and get it out, right? If we go through and do that, we should be in much better shape. But in any event, I want to thank you for joining me here today with basically going through this. It's always fun to have you here. And most importantly, I want to thank Wiley for allowing me to continue to make videos from their questions. And again, if you're looking for any other questions to be solved from this textbook, feel free to leave a comment in the down below. And I'm more than happy to see if I have the time to create something for you. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.